Before you decide to scroll away, pause for just a moment and ask yourself this one question: when was the last time you felt truly safe inside your own mind? Not safe in your home, not safe in your job, not safe in your relationships, but safe in your thoughts. Because many of us walk through life guarded by locks, passwords, and walls, yet our hearts remain wide open to invasion. Thoughts enter uninvited, whispers settle in quietly. Doubts dress themselves as logic, fear pretends to be wisdom, and slowly, without realizing it, we begin to live under siege, not by something we can see, but by something that speaks inside us. If you've ever felt attacked by thoughts you didn't choose, drained by people who leave you farther from Allah than closer, or trapped in a cycle of guilt, anxiety, or despair that feels spiritual as much as emotional, then stay. Because protection in Islam was never meant to be external first. It was always meant to begin in the unseen, in the heart, in the space where Shaytan whispers and where the soul either resists or surrenders. One of the greatest illusions we live with is the belief that danger always announces itself loudly. We imagine evil as something dramatic, obvious, and extreme. But the Quran teaches us something far more unsettling, that the most dangerous enemy often approaches softly. Shaytan does not crash into your life screaming rebellion. He knocks gently, whispering suggestions that feel familiar, reasonable, even compassionate. He doesn't usually tell you to disobey Allah outright. He tells you to delay obedience. He doesn't say, lose hope. He says, just rest for now. He doesn't say, you are worthless. He says, you'll never change anyway. And slowly the heart becomes tired. Slowly faith becomes heavy. Slowly the path that once felt clear becomes foggy. This is not because Allah has left you. It is because the battle you were never taught to recognize is being fought where you weren't watching. Islam does not deny the reality of evil thoughts. It names them. It explains them. It gives them context. It tells us that some thoughts come from the nafs, some from Shaytan, and some from Allah. And the wisdom here is profound. Not every thought is you. Not every thought deserves your loyalty. Not every inner voice speaks truth. One of the greatest protections you can ever gain is learning to separate your identity from the noise in your head. Because Shaytan thrives on confusion. He wants you to believe that because you thought something, you are something. Because you felt something, it defines you. Because a whisper came, you consented to it. But Allah, in His mercy, tells us otherwise. You are not held accountable for the thoughts that pass through you uninvited. You are accountable for what you host, what you entertain, and what you act upon. The heart in Islam is not a metaphor. It is a battlefield. And whatever occupies the heart will influence the limbs, the tongue, and the direction of your life. When the heart is filled with remembrance, whispers struggle to survive. When the heart is empty, whispers echo loudly. Shaytan does not need to overpower a believer. He only needs to distract one. He does not need to destroy faith. He only needs to weaken focus. And that is why protection begins not with fear of Shaytan, but with awareness of Allah. Because Shaytan flees not from strength, but from sincerity. He flees not from intelligence, but from remembrance. He flees not from perfection, but from hearts that turn back to Allah again and again. No matter how many times they stumble, evil thoughts often attack at moments of vulnerability. When you are tired, when you are lonely, when you are grieving, when you are disappointed in yourself, Shaytan studies you. He watches your patterns. He waits for the cracks, not the walls. And when he whispers, he rarely introduces something new. He amplifies what already hurts. He magnifies your insecurities. He replays your failures. He exaggerates the opinions of people who hurt you. He reminds you of doors that closed, mistakes you made, prayers you delayed. And then he adds one dangerous ingredient: hopelessness. Because once hope is gone, resistance collapses. A heart without hope is easy to control, But Allah, in His mercy, gives us a powerful truths. Shaytan's power is limited. He cannot force you. He cannot compel you. He cannot touch the heart that seeks refuge sincerely. His weapon is suggestion, not domination. And that means you are never as powerless as you feel. Protection does not require you to silence every thought. It requires you to choose which thoughts you obey. The believer's strength is not in never being tempted, but in knowing where to turn when temptation arrives. One of the most overlooked forms of protection is knowledge, true knowledge of Allah. Not just facts, but recognition, because when you truly know who Allah is, whispers lose their authority. When you know Allah as Al-Adl, the just, you stop believing the lie that life is unfair to you alone. When you know Allah as Ar-Rahman, the entirely merciful, you stop believing the lie that your sins are greater than His forgiveness. When you know Allah as Al-Wakil, the disposer of affairs, you stop believing the lie that everything depends on your control. Shaytan thrives on a distorted image of Allah. He wants you to see Allah as distant, harsh, easily angered, or impossible to please, because a believer who fears Allah incorrectly will either become paralyzed or rebellious. True protection comes when fear is balanced with hope and awe is paired with love. Evil people are another test, and often they are more dangerous than evil thoughts because they reinforce the whispers externally. Not everyone who smiles at you wants goodness for your heart. Not everyone who speaks confidently speaks truth. Islam does not teach us to be naive. It teaches us to be discerning. The Prophet taught that a person follows the religion of their close companion. This is not a small statement. It means that proximity shapes belief. Repetition shapes perception. Energy transfers. You may think you are strong enough to withstand toxic company, but hearts are more absorbent than we like to admit. You begin to normalize what you repeatedly witness. You begin to justify what you repeatedly hear. You begin to adopt the values of the environment you sit in most often. Protection from people does not mean arrogance or isolation. It means wisdom. It means knowing when presence benefits your iman and when it drains it. It means recognizing that some people may not be evil in intention, but harmful in influence. And Islam gives you permission to protect your heart, even if it disappoints others. You are not required to keep access open to those who lead you away from Allah, mock your faith, trivialize your struggles, or constantly pull you back into sin. Boundaries are not a lack of mercy. They are a form of stewardship over what Allah entrusted you with. Shaytan loves environments where Allah is rarely remembered. He loves gatherings where backbiting flows freely, where arrogance is rewarded, where mockery feels normal. And he especially loves when believers underestimate the impact of their surroundings. You may not realize it, but your heart keeps a record. Every conversation leaves a trace. Every joke shapes sensitivity. Every habit carves a path. Protection sometimes requires distance, not because you are better than others, but because you are responsible for your own soul. One of the most powerful shields Allah gave us is remembrance, Dhikr, not as a ritual divorced from life, but as a living awareness. Dhikr is not only words on the tongue, it is presence in the heart. When you remember Allah consistently, you remind yourself of reality. You remind yourself who is in control. You remind yourself where safety truly lies. Shaytan whispers to isolate you from Allah. Dhikr reconnects you. And this is why the Quran describes remembrance as tranquility, because a heart anchored to Allah does not drift as easily when storms come. But consistency matters more than quantity. Shaytan is not threatened by occasional bursts of spirituality, followed by long neglect. He is threatened by steady, quiet devotion. A few moments of sincere remembrance every day can do more to protect your heart than emotional highs that fade quickly. The heart is trained through repetition. Just as negative thoughts become habits, so does turning to Allah. Over time, The heart learns where to go automatically when discomfort arises. Another layer of protection is dua. Not formal, polished words, but honest turning. Dua is an admission of vulnerability. It is the believer saying, I cannot protect myself without you. And that admission itself is strength. Shaytan wants you to believe that asking for help is weakness. Allah teaches you that asking Him is worship. There is a profound difference. When you raise your hands in dua, you are not announcing defeat. You are declaring allegiance. You are choosing reliance over arrogance. The whispers of Shaytan often intensify when you are striving to change. This is crucial to understand. If you feel increased resistance when you try to pray more, learn more, or leave a sin, it is not a sign you are failing. It is often a sign you are threatening something. Shaytan does not fight what already belongs to him. He fights what he is losing. And this is why the path of growth often feels harder before it feels lighter. The believer must learn not to interpret difficulty as rejection. Sometimes difficulty is confirmation that you are moving in the right direction. One of Shaytan's most dangerous strategies is to convince you that you are alone in your struggle. He wants you to believe that everyone else is stronger, purer, more consistent, more worthy. Comparison is his tool, shame is his fuel. But Allah exposes this lie by reminding us that even the best of people struggled. The prophets faced whispers, fear, grief, and exhaustion. They did not become beloved to Allah by being immune to hardship, but by turning back to Him within it. Your struggle does not disqualify you. It humanizes you. Protection also comes through the Quran, not only as recitation, but as reflection. The Quran reorients the heart. It reminds you of the unseen realities that Shaytan wants you to forget. It reminds you that this world is temporary, that trials have purpose, that Allah's promise is true. When the Quran becomes a regular companion, it creates a filter. Thoughts that contradict its message become easier to identify. Lies become easier to question. Hope becomes easier to access. Shaytan often attacks through urgency. He wants you to react, not reflect. He wants you to make decisions while emotionally charged. One of the most powerful protections is pausing, slowing down, seeking clarity before action. Islam teaches deliberation because impulsivity often leads to regret. When you slow down, you give your intellect and your iman time to engage. You move from reaction to intention, and intention transforms actions. It is also important to understand that protection does not mean a life free of struggle. It means a life anchored in meaning. Shaytan wants you to believe that peace means comfort. Allah teaches you that peace comes from alignment. When your heart is aligned with its purpose, even hardship feels different. It may still hurt, but it does not hollow you out. It does not define you. It does not steal your direction. Purification of the heart is not a one-time achievement. It is a lifelong process. Just as the body needs regular cleansing, so does the heart. And sometimes, the presence of whispers is a reminder to clean what has accumulated. Instead of seeing evil thoughts as proof of corruption, see them as invitations to return. Every whisper can become a doorway to deeper reliance if you respond with awareness. And remember this, Shaytan fears a believer who knows their Lord more than a believer who knows their enemy. Your focus should never be on him. It should always be on Allah. The more you fill your life with remembrance, sincerity, humility, and trust, the less space whispers have to settle. Darkness does not survive where light is consistently present. You were never meant to fight this battle alone. Allah did not create you vulnerable and then abandon you. He gave you guidance, tools, mercy, and access to Him at every moment. Protection is not about building walls so high that nothing enters. It is about building a heart so connected that whatever enters is filtered through faith. And when you fall, when you forget, when the whispers return, as they will, you are not defeated. You are simply being called back again. One of the most liberating truths a believer can learn is that not every thought that passes through the mind belongs to them. Thoughts appear suddenly, without invitation, without warning, and often without alignment with who we truly are. Islam recognizes this reality with profound mercy. The heart and mind are exposed to passing ideas, images, doubts, and fears, and this exposure itself is not a sin. What matters is what we choose to do with what appears. Shaytan thrives on convincing people that a thought equals an intention, and an intention equals identity. This is how guilt is manufactured and how hope is slowly drained. When a person believes that every dark or disturbing thought reflects their true self, they begin to lose trust in their own heart, and that loss becomes a powerful opening for despair. The human mind is not a clean, controlled space. It is more like a busy road. Cars pass by constantly, but you are not required to chase every car, open every door, or invite every passenger inside. A thought can pass through without becoming a belief. A whisper can appear without becoming a decision. Allah, in His justice and compassion, does not hold a servant accountable for what they did not choose. This is why intrusive thoughts, doubts, and fleeting urges are not proof of weak faith. In many cases, they are proof of resistance. Shaytan does not whisper to hearts that are already surrendered to him. He whispers where there is aman, because aman is what he wants to disturb. One of the greatest protections is learning to observe thoughts without obeying them. The believer learns to ask, where is this thought coming from, and where is it trying to take me? A thought that leads to despair, arrogance, hopelessness, or distance from Allah does not deserve authority, no matter how convincing it sounds. Shaytan often disguises his whispers as concern realism or self-awareness. He may say you are being honest with yourself, when in reality he is slowly eroding your trust in Allah's mercy. Recognizing this pattern weakens his influence because his power depends on being unrecognized. Islam teaches that the heart is the center of choice, not the mind alone. A thought knocking on the door is not the same as a thought being welcomed in. When you stop identifying yourself with every inner voice, you reclaim control over your spiritual direction. You begin to understand that faith is not the absence of unwanted thoughts, but the ability to respond to them correctly. Even the companions of the Prophet worried about certain thoughts, and they were reassured that the discomfort they felt toward those whispers was itself a sign of faith. Shaytan wants believers to drown in self-accusation, to confuse temptation with intention and whispers with belief. Allah wants believers to turn back with clarity and humility. When a person understands that not every thought defines them, shame loses its grip, repentance becomes easier, and hope returns to the heart. The believer learns to seek refuge, redirect attention, and continue forward without collapsing under the weight of passing darkness. This awareness transforms the inner struggle from a source of fear into a space of conscious choice and spiritual growth. One of the most important realizations in the spiritual journey is understanding that Shaytan does not possess control over the believer. His influence is limited to suggestion. This distinction changes everything. Control would mean force, compulsion, and inevitability, but suggestion requires consent. Shaytan cannot move the limbs, cannot command the heart, and cannot override the will. He can only whisper ideas, plant doubts, and decorate falsehood until it appears attractive or logical. When this reality is forgotten, fear grows larger than it should, and the believer begins to feel powerless. Islam restores balance by reminding us that the enemy's reach ends where awareness and remembrance begin. Shaytan's greatest success comes from making his whispers feel like your own inner voice. He rarely presents himself as an enemy. Instead, he adopts familiar tones, caution, self-criticism, rationality, or even false piety. He might encourage excessive guilt in the name of humility or promote delay in the name of wisdom. By doing this, He avoids resistance because people rarely fight what they believe is coming from themselves. The believer who understands this strategy gains clarity, a thought that pulls the heart away from Allah, even if it sounds reasonable, deserves scrutiny rather than obedience. Awareness alone, however, is not enough. The Quran teaches that Shaytan's whispers weaken in the presence of remembrance. Dhikr is not merely repetition, it is orientation. When the heart is oriented toward Allah, whispers lose their momentum. This is why Shaytan actively works to distract from prayer, delay remembrance, and trivialize small acts of worship. He knows that consistent connection, even if quiet and imperfect, creates a barrier he cannot cross. He does not fear dramatic change as much as he fears steady sincerity. Another way Shaytan exaggerates his influence is by convincing the believer that temptation itself equals failure. This lie creates paralysis. When people believe that being tempted means they are already losing, they stop resisting. Islam teaches the opposite. Temptation is part of the test, not a verdict on its outcome. Resistance, even repeated resistance after repeated falls, is what defines success. Shaytan cannot survive where a servant keeps returning to Allah because every return weakens his narrative of defeat and permanence. Shaytan also relies on isolation. He wants the believer to think their struggle is unique and shameful. This perceived isolation increases the weight of whispers and reduces the likelihood of seeking help or turning to Allah openly. In reality, every believer faces whispers in different forms. Knowing this strips Shaytan of one of his strongest tools, because secrecy is where suggestion grows most powerful. When a believer internalizes that Shaytan only suggests and does not control, fear is replaced with responsibility. The focus shifts from being overwhelmed by the enemy to strengthening the connection with Allah. Protection no longer feels like an impossible task, but a daily choice. With every act of remembrance, every conscious redirection, and every refusal to surrender to despair, the believer quietly asserts freedom. Shaytan's influence shrinks, not because he disappears, but because his voice no longer carries authority. The heart in Islam is not a symbolic concept or a poetic expression. It is the core of spiritual life and the center of moral direction. It is the place where belief settles, where intentions are formed, and where the unseen battle unfolds. Everything that reaches the limbs must pass through the heart first, which is why the state of the heart determines the state of the life. When the heart is sound, actions follow with clarity and balance. When the heart is neglected, even outward obedience can feel heavy and hollow. Shaytan understands this reality, which is why his primary target is not behavior, but the inner space that gives behavior meaning. The heart is constantly being shaped by what it loves, what it fears, and what it depends on. Every attachment leaves a mark. Every habit carves a pathway. Over time, the heart becomes inclined toward whatever it repeatedly turns to. This is why purification is not achieved through occasional moments of inspiration, but through sustained awareness. A heart left unattended does not remain neutral, it drifts. Shaytan does not need to pull it violently in the wrong direction. He only needs to allow neglect to do the work. Guarding the heart requires recognizing what enters it. Words, images, conversations, and environments all carry influence. What seems harmless on the surface can quietly reshape sensitivity and priorities. The heart absorbs before the mind analyzes. This is why Islam emphasizes lowering the gaze, guarding the tongue, and choosing company carefully. These are not restrictions meant to suffocate, but protections meant to preserve. When the heart is repeatedly exposed to negativity, arrogance, or distraction, it becomes harder for remembrance to settle deeply. Purification of the heart does not mean eliminating all struggle. It means responding correctly to what arises. A purified heart is not one that never experiences whispers, anger, or sadness, but one that returns quickly to Allah when those states appear. The believer learns to notice shifts in the heart and address them before they harden. Small acts of repentance, gratitude, and humility function like regular cleansing, preventing buildup that later becomes difficult to remove. Dhikr plays a central role in this process because it re-centers the heart. When Allah is remembered, the heart remembers its purpose. The noise of the world loses volume, and the whispers of Shaytan lose urgency. Remembrance does not remove hardship, but it changes how hardship is carried. A heart anchored in Allah can bend without breaking. It can feel pain without losing direction. The Quran also serves as a mirror for the heart. Through its verses, the believer recognizes patterns, warnings, and hope. The Quran exposes diseases of the heart gently, without condemnation, while offering pathways to healing. Over time, consistent engagement with the Quran trains the heart to distinguish between truth and illusion, sincerity and ego. When the heart is treated as the battlefield it truly is, the believer becomes intentional. Protection becomes proactive rather than reactive. Choices are made with awareness of long-term impact, not just immediate comfort. Shaytan loses his advantage when the heart is guarded not by constant fear, but by constant return to Allah. In that return, the heart regains strength, clarity, and the ability to stand firm amid unseen struggle. Human beings are deeply shaped by the environments they inhabit and the people they keep close, often more than they realize. Faith does not exist in isolation. It breathes within relationships, conversations, and shared values. Islam acknowledges this reality with clarity and honesty, teaching that companionship is not a neutral choice, but a formative one. A person may believe their faith is strong enough to withstand any influence, yet the heart is porous, absorbing attitudes, priorities, and behaviors through repeated exposure. What surrounds you eventually settles within you, quietly and persistently. People influence not only what we do, but how we think and feel. Words repeated often enough begin to sound normal, even when they contradict faith. Jokes that belittle modesty, cynicism toward religion, constant complaint, or casual disobedience slowly reshape the moral compass. Over time, what once felt uncomfortable begins to feel familiar, and what once felt wrong begins to feel excusable. This gradual shift is rarely noticed until the heart feels distant and the soul feels heavy. Shaytan relies on this slow erosion because it bypasses resistance. Islam does not teach withdrawal from society or harsh judgment of others. It teaches discernment. Not every person who enters your life is meant to stay close to your heart. Some relationships are meant to teach, some to support, and some to reveal boundaries. Protecting your faith sometimes means limiting access, even when intentions are good. This is not arrogance, nor is it a lack of compassion. It is responsibility. The heart is an amana, a trust from Allah, and neglecting its protection is not humility, it is carelessness. Choosing your environment wisely is an act of worship. Seeking spaces where Allah is remembered, where sincerity is valued, and where growth is encouraged strengthens iman naturally. In such spaces, reminders feel gentle rather than forced, and returning to Allah feels normal rather than awkward. Conversely, environments that constantly pull attention toward dunya, ego, or desire make spiritual effort feel burdensome. The believer begins to associate faith with struggle rather than nourishment, not because faith is heavy, but because the surroundings are draining. Boundaries are a form of self-knowledge. They require honesty about personal weaknesses and sensitivities. What may be harmless for one person may be harmful for another. Islam honors this individuality by encouraging self-awareness. Protecting yourself from harmful influence does not require cutting everyone off, but it does require knowing when to step back, change topics, or excuse yourself. Sometimes the most courageous act is to leave a gathering quietly before it leaves a mark on your heart. Shaytan often whispers that setting boundaries will lead to loneliness or rejection. In reality, protecting your faith creates space for healthier connections to form. Allah replaces what is left for His sake with something better, even if the replacement arrives in unexpected ways. When the believer prioritizes amen over approval, the heart gains stability. Relationships become choices rather than needs, and influence loses its grip. Over time, consistent exposure to positive company reshapes the heart just as powerfully as negative company once did. Faith becomes easier not because life is simpler, but because support exists. The believer learns that guarding the heart is not about isolating from people, but about aligning with those who help the soul remember why it exists and where it is going. One of the most profound realities of the spiritual path is that turning back to Allah is not a response reserved for perfection, but a constant return woven into the life of the believer. Islam does not promise a journey free from struggle, whispers, or moments of weakness. It promises an open door that never closes, no matter how many times a person approaches it with regret and need. Shaytan works tirelessly to convince the believer that repeated mistakes disqualify them, that mercy has limits, and that distance is permanent. Allah, in contrast, invites the servant to return again and again, not despite their weakness, but because of it. Every time a believer turns back to Allah, something within the heart shifts. Even when circumstances remain unchanged, reliance deepens. The act of returning breaks the illusion of self-sufficiency and replaces it with humility. This humility is not degrading, it is stabilizing. It grounds the believer in reality, reminding them that strength has never come from control, but from connection. Shaytan fears this return because it dismantles his most powerful narrative, the idea that failure is final. Struggle itself becomes meaningful when it leads back to Allah. Pain, confusion, and disappointment are no longer seen as punishments, but as signals. They reveal attachment, reliance, and expectation that were placed where they did not belong. When the heart responds by turning to Allah, the struggle transforms from an obstacle into a guide. It redirects attention away from temporary sources of comfort and toward the only source that does not fail. This is why moments of breaking often become moments of awakening. Returning to Allah does not require elaborate rituals or perfect words. It requires honesty. A sincere turning, even in silence, even in exhaustion, carries immense weight. Shaytan wants the believer to delay this return, to wait until they feel worthy or strong. Allah invites the return in moments of weakness, confusion, and emptiness. The door is not guarded by conditions, only by sincerity. Each return softens the heart, making it more receptive to guidance and less vulnerable to despair. Over time, the believer learns that the goal is not to eliminate struggle, but to shorten the distance between falling and returning. What once took months of distance becomes days, then moments. The heart becomes trained to seek Allah instinctively, like a child reaching for safety. This instinct is one of the greatest protections a believer can have. Shaytan loses his advantage when the heart no longer stays away after a fall. Turning back to Allah also reshapes how the believer views themselves. Identity becomes rooted in servitude rather than performance. Worth is no longer measured by consistency alone, but by sincerity and direction. This shift frees the heart from the crushing weight of perfectionism and replaces it with hope. Hope does not deny failure, it transcends it. In this constant return, the believer discovers a quiet strength. Life remains complex, trials continue, and whispers still come, but the heart is no longer easily displaced. Each return reinforces trust, and each moment of reliance deepens awareness of Allah's nearness.